Even the strongest need a moment to let go. That thought would not have crossed Maya Collins's mind if anyone had asked her that morning. She was the kind of woman who carried grocery bags for her mother when she was only 10 years old, who filled out scholarship forms by herself in high school, because no one else had the time, who worked 3 part-time jobs during college just to make sure she could pay rent. Letting go was not a luxury she thought she could afford. Yet as the lights of Manhattan pulsed outside the glass windows of Blackwell Tower, as the city moved at its unstoppable pace, Maya was on the verge of discovering how fragile strength could be when pushed too far. Maya was 25, fresh out of graduate school, her degree in economics still crisp in its folder back in Ohio, where her mother had framed it proudly on the wall. She had dreamed of working in New York for years, of standing tall in a skyscraper office, with the kind of confidence she had only seen in magazines. The reality was not glossy. Being an assistant to a billionaire CEO was an endless march of meetings, emails, phone calls, schedules, and last-minute crises. She handled all of it with precision, but her body carried the toll. Most nights she left the building when janitors were vacuuming carpets, and security guards nodded her a tired good night. The man she worked for was Ethan Blackwell, 34, the kind of name that financial headlines repeated daily. He was born into wealth, but he had also multiplied it tenfold with sharp instincts in investments, real estate, and technology ventures. To the public, he was cold, precise, and untouchable. To his employees, he was demanding and meticulous. To Maya, he was both intimidating and fascinating. He walked into rooms with the confidence of someone who had never once doubted that the world would bend to his will. His dark suits were tailored, his hair perfectly in place, his gaze sharp enough to silence an entire boardroom. Yet he was also known for an odd fairness. He did not raise his voice unnecessarily, and he rarely humiliated anyone. Still, he carried the weight of authority like armor, and few dared get close enough to see beneath it. That night, Maya sat at her desk long after most had gone home. The building hummed with the soft vibration of air conditioning and the occasional ding of an elevator. Her eyes blurred as she stared at spreadsheets, numbers swimming together in incoherent lines. She rubbed her temples, willing herself to finish one more task. Her student loan balances pressed against her chest like physical weight. If she impressed Ethan, she might secure a promotion or a raise. Every hour mattered. Every sacrifice counted. Her body did not agree. At 11:30, as the lights of Times Square flickered in the distance, Maya felt her stomach twist and her chest tighten. She rose to grab another stack of files, and the world tilted sharply. She caught the edge of her desk, breathing fast, panic rising. She told herself to hold on to steady, to keep moving, but her knees buckled. A hand caught her before she fell, firm, steady, unyielding. She blinked, disoriented, and found herself looking up into the dark eyes of Ethan Blackwell. He was supposed to have left hours ago, likely to some dinner with investors, or to his penthouse overlooking Central Park. Yet here he was, sleeves rolled up, tie loosened, standing close enough that she could smell the faint mix of expensive cologne and something more human like soap and faint coffee. Maya's throat tightened with embarrassment. She struggled to push herself upright, to insist she was fine. But Ethan's voice stopped her low and controlled, carrying that quiet authority that made people listen. Just lie down and relax. The words struck her harder than the weakness in her legs. They were not barked as an order, but spoken with a kind of certainty that expected compliance. Maya stiffened, heat rising to her cheeks. Relax was not in her vocabulary. Lying down in front of him felt like defeat. She shook her head quickly. "I am fine," she whispered, though her voice betrayed the tremor she tried to hide. Ethan guided her toward the small leather couch near the office wall, not forceful but steady, as though he had decided she would not win this argument. His hand rested lightly at her elbow, anchoring her. Maya sat because fighting felt harder than conceding. Her pulse hammered in her ears. She hated the vulnerability of the moment. She hated that her boss, the man whose opinion mattered more than any other in her professional world, now saw her not as capable or competent, but as fragile. She bit her lip and forced herself upright, muttering that she had work left. Ethan's gaze held hers steady and unreadable. For a long moment, the office was silent except for the faint hum of the city beyond the glass. Then he spoke again, calm but unyielding. "Pushing past your limits will not prove anything. Strength is knowing when to stop." Maya's chest tightened. Shame burned hotter than the weakness in her body. She grabbed her bag with clumsy fingers and forced herself to stand. Her voice came out sharper than she intended. "I do not need you to take care of me." She fled before he could answer her heels, clicking against the marble floors, the weight of his gaze following her. The elevator doors closed around her like a shield. By the time she stepped into the cool night air, her cheeks were burning. She promised herself she would never let that moment happen again. Maya Collins had never liked to think of herself as fragile. Growing up in a small town in Ohio, where winters bit hard and summers stretched out long and humid, she learned early that fragility was a luxury. Her father had passed away when she was 13, leaving her mother to manage 2 jobs and a mountain of bills. Maya, still just a girl, picked up responsibility, the way other kids picked up hobbies. She bagged groceries after school, tutored younger children in math, and saved every coin she earned. She was the kind of teenager who calculated utility bills at the kitchen table while her friends were at football games. Strength became her shield and pride her constant companion. By the time she entered college, she had perfected the art of appearing unshakable. She juggled classes, late-night shifts at a diner, and weekend hours at the library. When exhaustion threatened to drag her down, she smiled tighter and walked faster. She told herself that if she wanted to escape small-town invisibility, if she wanted to matter, she had to be tougher than anyone else. Vulnerability in her mind was the fastest way to be dismissed. That pattern carried into her adult life. New York was the city of ambition, and she felt both exhilarated and overwhelmed when she arrived with 2 suitcases and a determination that bordered on obsession. Getting hired at Blackwell Industries was a stroke of fate and grit combined. She had impressed the recruitment panel with her quick answers and sharp understanding of economic trends. When she was placed as assistant to Ethan Blackwell himself, she had celebrated quietly with a call to her mother. Her mother's pride was palpable even across the miles. Yet with pride came pressure. She could not afford mistakes. She could not afford to show cracks. Every day at the office was a performance of capability. She managed schedules that could exhaust, a team remembered details that others forgot, and anticipated needs before they were spoken. Colleagues admired her efficiency, but few knew the cost. Her evenings were swallowed by spreadsheets and preparation for the next day. Her weekends were too often spent catching up on tasks that had slipped through during the week. The loneliness that followed her into her tiny studio apartment was pushed aside with television noise or the hum of city traffic through thin walls. The truth was that Maya longed deep down for someone to notice how tired she was. She longed for someone to tell her she did not have to fight every battle alone. But longing was dangerous. It weakened resolve. So she buried it. She told herself she wanted nothing more than professional respect and financial independence. Still, there were moments when the mask nearly cracked. On crowded subways, when her reflection looked pale and drawn. In the window, she would remember the days she had sat beside her mother, counting tips and deciding which bill could wait another week. She remembered her mother's worn hands and the way her smile had faltered under the weight of constant responsibility. Maya had sworn never to let herself look that defeated. Pride was not just personal, it was legacy. The office only heightened the divide between her vulnerability and her facade. The other assistants whispered about weekend getaways or shopping trips. They laughed easily in the break room. Maya, with her packed lunch and meticulous planner, felt like an outsider. Some days she wanted to join them to admit she was tired, that she was scared of failing, that she envied their lightness. But her pride clamped down, reminding her that she had clawed her way here and could not risk appearing soft. The night Ethan found her nearly collapsing at her desk had shaken her more than she wanted to admit. His words lingered in her head, taunting her when she tried to dismiss them. Just lie down and relax. She hated that her body had obeyed him, even for a moment that her pride had faltered in the weight of his certainty. She hated more that a part of her had wanted to surrender, to let someone else shoulder the burden for once. It was that dangerous wanting that frightened her. Ethan Blackwell was not a man who tolerated weakness. At least that was what she believed. He was powerful always, in control, a man whose fortune and reputation made him untouchable. If he saw her as fragile, he would lose respect for her. Worse, he might pity her. Maya could not bear pity, so she reinforced her walls. The morning after that humiliating encounter, she arrived at the office earlier than usual. She polished her appearance to perfection, hair neat, blouse, crisp makeup, subtle but sharp. She greeted coworkers with brisk nods, her voice clipped and efficient. She buried herself in tasks with relentless focus. Inside, though, she replayed every second of the previous night, from the moment her knees buckled to the way Ethan's hand steadied her to the tone of his voice that had felt strangely protective. She tried to tell herself it was nothing, that he was only ensuring his employee did not faint in his office. But the echo of his words gnawed at her pride. Strength is knowing when to stop. She did not believe that. Strength was going on when you had no choice. Strength was ignoring your body and proving everyone wrong. That was how she had survived so far. Yet part of her, the part she buried deepest, wondered if maybe Ethan had glimpsed something she could not admit. Vulnerability terrified her. It meant opening herself to disappointment. It meant trusting someone to stay when her experience had taught her people left. Her father's absence was a wound that had never healed. Her mother's exhaustion was a reminder that love did not erase struggle. Maya built her life on the belief that if she never asked, she would never be let down. And so she continued, determined to silence the whisper inside that longed for rest, that longed for care. She convinced herself that the humiliation would fade, that Ethan would forget the moment entirely, and that she could bury the memory beneath layers of competence. But the truth which she could not yet face was that the encounter had cracked the armor she had spent years constructing. And once cracked, it would not hold forever. Ethan Blackwell was not the kind of man who noticed small things easily, at least not outside of balance sheets and quarterly reports. He lived in a world of billion-dollar deals, mergers, and global strategies, where every detail was measured in profit margins and legal consequences. Yet after the night he found Maya nearly collapsing at her desk, something shifted in his awareness. He began to see details that were not part of financial statements. He saw the faint dark circles under Maya's eyes that concealer could not hide. He saw the way her hands trembled slightly when she reached for her coffee mug in morning meetings. He saw the way she forced a smile when coworkers whispered behind her back. He noticed that she never left her desk for lunch and that she answered emails faster than anyone else in the building, sometimes within seconds. At first, Ethan told himself it was nothing more than professional vigilance. A burnt-out assistant was inefficient. He needed her at her best because she managed more of his day than anyone else in the company. But as the days passed, his reasoning faltered. Concern slipped into the edges of his routine, uninvited but persistent. One morning he walked into the conference room where the board was waiting and realized Maya was already there, arranging files with mechanical precision. He studied her for a brief moment and then said quietly, "You can handle the client update on your own." Her head snapped up, startled. She had never presented in front of the board before. Her lips parted as though to protest, but his gaze held steady, not commanding but confident. "You know the material better than anyone," he added. And she did. Maya delivered the update with poise, her voice steady despite the flicker of nerves. The board members nodded, impressed. Ethan watched the flush of pride color her cheeks, a pride she tried to hide, as she returned to her seat. Afterward, as they walked out of the room, he said simply, "Good work." The words were plain, but coming from him, they carried weight. Maya muttered a quick thank you, her voice tight as if accepting praise made her uncomfortable. Ethan's concern grew in quieter ways, too. He noticed when she skipped breakfast during early meetings, so he began placing an extra pastry on the tray the caterers brought in. He noticed when she rubbed her temple after hours at her desk, so he left a bottle of water and pain relievers near her computer without a word. When she nearly dropped her files one evening, he took them from her hands and said evenly, "Go home, Maya." She stiffened, clearly irritated at what she considered interference, and left without thanking him. Still, the gesture had not been lost on her. The most telling moment came in the elevator late one night. They were alone, the soft hum of the lift carrying them down from the top floor. Maya stood with her shoulders squared, her bag heavy on her arm, exhaustion evident in the slump she tried to disguise. Ethan glanced at her reflection in the mirrored walls, then said quietly, "You don't always have to prove you're unbreakable." Maya froze. Her jaw clenched, her eyes fixed on the glowing numbers above the doors. For a moment he thought she might ignore him, but then she whispered almost too softly to hear, "If I don't prove it, no one will believe in me." The words pierced deeper than he expected. they spoke of battles he had not witnessed of years before Blackwell Tower, of struggles carved into her very bones. He felt an unexpected surge of respect, even admiration, but it was accompanied by a sharp ache. He recognized in her the same relentless drive that had once consumed him, the same refusal to stop, even when his own health had suffered. But where he had safety nets of wealth and connections, she had nothing but her pride. Ethan wanted to tell her that she did not need to live this way, that strength was not measured by the absence of rest, that no one who mattered would think less of her for admitting fatigue. Yet he stayed silent. Maya's pride was a wall he could not breach by force. She needed to come to him willingly, not out of obligation. The elevator doors opened. Maya stepped out quickly, her voice suddenly sharper as she said, "I'll send you tomorrow's schedule tonight." He watched her walk away, her back straight, her pace, quick as though distance could erase what had just been said. Ethan remained in the empty elevator, his hands in his pockets, a frown tugging at his lips. For the first time in years, he felt the frustration of caring for someone he could not control. He was a man used to solutions to direct action, but with Maya Collins he would need patience. What unsettled him most was not her defiance, but the quiet realization forming in his chest that her battles had become his concern too. The rumors began softly, the way whispers always do, in an office where ambition and jealousy lived in the corners of every cubicle. At first, it was just a glance, exchanged in the break room when Maya walked in, carrying Ethan's briefing notes. Then came the quiet laughter when she stayed late and left the building only minutes after him. Soon the murmurs gathered shape, transforming into sentences passed from one assistant to another. Of course, the billionaire CEO had chosen his assistant as more than an employee. Of course, the young woman with sharp eyes and a stubborn chin had found her way into his attention for reasons beyond her scheduling skills. Maya heard fragments in the hallways, in the silence that followed her into conference rooms. She clenched her jaw and walked faster, never showing that every word scraped at her pride. Ethan seemed unaffected. His expression never wavered, his composure never cracked, but his very calmness only added fuel to the gossip. People believed silence meant truth. The tension reached a breaking point during a quarterly strategy meeting. The boardroom was full, long polished table, gleaming under bright lights charts projected on the wall. Maya sat near the edge with her files perfectly aligned, every detail in order. Her hands trembled slightly as she poured coffee into cups for the directors, determined to ignore the watchful eyes that tracked her movements. She lifted the carafe for Ethan, and in that moment the tremor betrayed her. A stream of dark liquid spilled across the table, spreading toward important papers. Gasps rippled through the room. Someone muttered under their breath. Maya froze mortified, her cheeks blazing red. She reached for napkins, her fingers clumsy, but before she could react further, Ethan calmly lifted the stack of papers away, his voice steady and almost casual. "No harm done," he said, as though it were the smallest of inconveniences. His composure silenced the murmurs, his calmness absorbing the tension. Yet for Maya, the humiliation had already burned deep. She felt exposed, fragile, in front of powerful men and women who already doubted her worth. When the meeting ended, she gathered her things quickly, avoiding every glance, her throat tight. Outside the boardroom, she caught her reflection in the glass wall, pale skin eyes wide with shame, A young woman who looked too much like she did not belong. The whispers that followed her down the corridor confirmed what she already knew. They thought she was careless. They thought she was only there because Ethan Blackwell had chosen her for reasons other than competence. By the time she returned to her desk, her hands were shaking so badly she could hardly type. She bit the inside of her cheek until she tasted blood, willing herself not to cry. Pride forbade it. Vulnerability was a weakness she could not allow anyone to see. That evening, as she left the office, her head held high. Though her chest ached, she passed two assistants by the elevators. One leaned toward the other and whispered too loudly to be accidental. "Must be nice to have the boss cleaning up your mistakes." The words sliced through her. She kept walking, forcing her heels to strike the marble floor in sharp, steady beats. Ethan did not mention the incident directly, but she noticed the next morning that he had moved her seat in meetings to a place where she would not serve coffee, where she could focus solely on the work. It was his silent way of protecting her, but to Maya it felt like confirmation that he had seen her weakness. She hated that even kindness from him scraped at her pride. At home that night, she stared at the ceiling of her tiny apartment, replaying every moment. The spill, the whispers, the steady way Ethan had looked at her, as though she were more than the mistake. She wondered if he realized how deeply the moment had cut her. She wondered if he thought she was fragile. Her pride screamed that she must work harder, arrive earlier, prove beyond doubt that she belonged. Yet beneath the pride, in a place she rarely let herself explore, was a quieter truth, a longing to be seen, not as flawless, but as human. To be allowed to falter without fear of being cast aside. That longing was dangerous. It made her heart ache in ways she could not admit. So she buried it again, just as she always did, and promised herself that tomorrow she would be sharper, faster, stronger. What she did not know was that Ethan had been watching not with judgment, but with something she had not yet dared to name. Victoria Hale entered the story with the kind of presence that made entire rooms shift. She was 32, polished, ambitious, and carried the air of someone who knew how to weaponize charm. As Director of Public Relations at Blackwell Industries, she had built her career on controlling narratives, shaping perceptions, and turning scandals into opportunities. Once years ago, she had been closer to Ethan, working late nights beside him. During the company's expansion into Asia, their conversations spilling over into dinners that hinted at more than professional interest. Nothing official had ever come of it, but Victoria had carried the sting of being overlooked when Ethan remained detached. So when she noticed the way his gaze lingered on Maya Collins, the young assistant with determination in her eyes and exhaustion in her shoulders, resentment took root. At first, she played subtle, leaning against door frames when Maya passed, offering sly comments wrapped in laughter. "Must be nice having the CEO so invested in your schedules." Or "not everyone gets to work so closely with Ethan. You must feel very lucky." Maya forced polite smiles and kept moving, though each remark tightened the knot in her stomach. Rumors needed only a whisper from someone like Victoria to spread. Within weeks, the office buzz grew louder. When a financial journalist called Victoria one afternoon, asking about Blackwell Industries' latest project, she slipped in a calculated aside about the CEO being particularly close to his assistant. The journalist, always hungry for intrigue, tucked the detail away. Soon the headline appeared on a niche blog and then on social media. Billionaire Blackwell in affair with assistant. The article was vague, filled with speculation and grainy photos of Maya entering the building at odd hours, nothing concrete yet. The insinuation was powerful. Maya found herself reading the words on her phone. During her commute, her heart pounding as though strangers had pried into her private thoughts. She knew the truth that her relationship with Ethan was nothing beyond professional tension and the unspoken undercurrents she tried to ignore. Still, the shame burned. At the office, conversations paused when she entered rooms. Her colleagues studied her with new eyes, some sympathetic, others jealous, many judgmental. Ethan confronted the situation with his usual composure. In a meeting with senior staff, he dismissed the gossip as distraction, his voice steady and commanding. "We do not allow baseless rumors to dictate this company's focus." Yet his denial, calm and firm, did little to ease Maya's turmoil. She could not control the way others looked at her. At lunch, she overheard one manager whisper, "Of course she is defensive. She has everything to lose if the truth comes out." Maya clenched her fists under the table and reminded herself to breathe. That evening, Ethan called her into his office. He closed the door, his expression unreadable. "I know you have seen the article." She nodded stiffly, words caught in her throat. "I intend to handle it," he continued. His tone was clipped, professional. But Maya shook her head. "No. If you defend me, people will only believe it more." His brows lifted slightly, surprised. "You should not have to shoulder this alone." She forced herself to meet his gaze, pride blazing, even as her chest ached. "If you say something it looks like favoritism, let them think what they want." Ethan studied her in silence, the lines at the corners of his mouth tightening. He wanted to protect her. She could see it in the flicker of his eyes. But she also knew how fragile reputations were in his world. If he shielded her too openly, it would cost him. She would not be the reason his empire cracked. As she turned to leave, he said quietly, "This will not define you, Maya." She paused, the sincerity in his voice, cutting deeper than the gossip ever could, then walked out before her resolve broke. Meanwhile, Victoria watched with quiet satisfaction. Every whisper that grew louder, every sidelong glance that followed Maya through the office, was fuel for her ambition. She told herself it was about protecting the company's image, but in truth it was personal. She resented the way Ethan looked at Maya with something warmer than his usual cool appraisal. She resented the assistant's presence in spaces where Victoria believed she should have stood. And most of all, she resented the possibility that someone so young, so unpolished compared to her own sophistication, could matter to him in ways she never had. She began planting more seeds, dropping comments to journalists she trusted, ensuring that Maya's name lingered in conversations that mattered. For Maya, the weeks that followed were suffocating. Her pride urged her to walk taller, work harder, prove beyond doubt that she belonged. Yet each day chipped at her confidence. When her phone buzzed with another notification about the gossip piece gaining traction, her hands shook. At night, she lay awake in her small apartment, staring at the ceiling, wondering if all her sacrifices had led her not to respect, but to ridicule. She wanted to believe Ethan's steady words that this would not define her, but the weight of perception pressed heavy. She knew too well that in the corporate world, reputation was currency, and hers was being shredded without her consent. Ethan remained outwardly calm, but inside he was seething. He despised manipulation, despised the way lies spread faster than truth. He began quietly investigating the source of the leaks, though Maya did not know. He also found himself watching her more closely, not with suspicion, but with concern. Every time she squared her shoulders in the hallway, every time she forced confidence, she did not feel he wanted to step in, yet she would not allow it. He saw the pride in her eyes, the stubborn determination that mirrored his own once upon a time. He understood it, respected it, even as it frustrated him. What neither of them realized was that the storm Victoria had unleashed was only beginning, and soon both pride and restraint would be tested far beyond whispered rumors. The days following the scandal should have pulled them apart, but instead a strange closeness began to grow between Ethan and Maya. It was not marked by grand gestures or obvious confessions, but by small, steady moments that slipped into the cracks of their guarded lives. Ethan began entrusting Maya with responsibilities that went beyond scheduling. He asked her to sit in on strategy calls to draft memos that would normally be filtered through layers of managers. At first, she thought it was because he did not trust anyone else after the leaks, but she soon realized it was because he trusted her most. The more he leaned on her, the more she glimpsed the man beneath the polished surface. He had always been calm in boardrooms. His voice measured, his expressions precise, but in private, she saw flashes of something else, a sardonic humor when a deal went absurdly wrong, a quiet sigh when long days stretched too late into the night, a rare smile when she made a dry remark that caught him off guard. One evening during a trip to Chicago for a major investor meeting, they found themselves delayed at the airport. Their flight was grounded due to storms, and the crowded terminal buzzed with restless passengers. Ethan, used to private jets and meticulous timing, should have been furious. Instead, he sat beside her at a gate, his suit jacket off his tie, loosened, sipping coffee from a paper cup. "You know," he said quietly, "airports are the great equalizer. Billionaire or student, everyone ends up in the same uncomfortable seats." Maya arched a brow, surprised by the levity. "Do you actually believe that, or are you just pretending to be relatable?" His lips curved slightly. Maybe both. The banter startled her, made her pulse quicken. She looked away, focusing on the rain streaking down the massive windows, but his words lingered. Later on the plane, when the turbulence jolted and the cabin lights flickered, Ethan noticed her shiver. Without asking, he shrugged off his jacket and draped it over her shoulders. The gesture was simple, unremarkable to anyone watching, but for Maya it was disarming. No one had looked after her like that in years. She wanted to protest, to return the jacket immediately, but exhaustion and the warmth of his coat kept her still. She closed her eyes, trying to convince herself it meant nothing. During that same trip, she learned pieces of Ethan's past he rarely shared. They were seated in a quiet restaurant after a long day of negotiations, the kind of place where the soft clink of silverware filled the silence. He seemed distracted, his gaze lingering on the candle flickering between them. Out of nowhere, he said, "Do you know what it feels like to be laughed at by an entire room?" She blinked, caught off guard. "I imagine it is not pleasant." He let out a bitter laugh. "Years ago, back in Philadelphia, I was engaged. She was everything society admired, beautiful, poised from a family that made mine look like amateurs. One night at a dinner party, someone asked what it was like, being engaged to a doctor. She smiled sweetly and said, "Underneath all that education, he is still just a ranch boy pretending." They all laughed, every last one of them. Maya stared at him, stunned by the rawness in his tone. "What did you do?" "I ended it that night, packed a bag, and came here the next morning." He lifted his glass, his expression unreadable, never looked back. For the first time, she saw him not as untouchable but as wounded. His perfection was a mask as much as her pride was. They were both hiding behind armor, forged from humiliation. The revelation settled deep in her chest. She understood him better now, understood why he valued control, why he distrusted appearances, why he worked so relentlessly. It was not just ambition, it was survival. In that moment, her view of him shifted. He was still powerful, still commanding, but he was also human. And that humanity drew her closer, despite every instinct telling her to keep distance. The following weeks only deepened the tension. They moved around each other in the office with an awareness that buzzed beneath every exchange. When their hands brushed as she passed him a file, she felt heat rush to her cheeks. When he leaned close to review a report, the scent of his cologne unsettled her concentration. Neither of them acknowledged it. Pride and professionalism stood as walls between them. Yet at night alone in her apartment, Maya replayed his words about being laughed at, about being seen as a fraud. She thought about how much it echoed her own fear of being dismissed, of being underestimated. And though she would never admit it, she found comfort in knowing that the billionaire CEO who seemed beyond reach carried scars not so different from her own. The storm broke one Monday morning when Maya arrived at the office to find her phone buzzing relentlessly with notifications. She scrolled through her news feed and froze at the sight of a headline splashed across a popular finance blog. CEO caught with young assistant. The article featured a blurry photo taken outside Blackwell Tower, a candid shot of Ethan steadying Maya by the elbow as she stumbled on the sidewalk. The angle made it look far more intimate than it had been, his face turned toward her. Her eyes lifted to him, their proximity impossible to mistake. The piece speculated about late night's inappropriate boundaries and whispered that her meteoric rise to responsibility within the company was not due to talent but favoritism. Maya's heart pounded as she skimmed the comments. Strangers dissected her face, her body language, her career. Some mocked her, others pitied her, many condemned her. By the time she reached her desk, the whispers in the office were deafening. She caught the sidelong glances, the forced smiles, the way conversations cut off when she entered the room. She wanted to disappear, to sink through the floor, but pride held her spine straight as she walked. Ethan summoned the executive team that afternoon. The boardroom was tense, directors shifting in their seats as the image was projected on the screen. Ethan studied the photo in silence, his jaw tight. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm but carried an edge of steel. "This is a distraction. We will not allow gossip to derail our work." His composure silenced some, but others were less forgiving. A shareholder leaned forward, his expression severe. "With respect, Ethan, this is not just gossip. It undermines the credibility of the company. If boundaries are being crossed, we need answers." The HR director cleared her throat, visibly uncomfortable. "There are protocols, Mr. Blackwell. If an executive is involved with a direct subordinate, it raises liability issues. For the good of the company, we will need to investigate." Maya sat frozen shame, scorching her cheeks. She wanted to protest, to explain that nothing improper had happened, but the weight of all those eyes crushed her voice. Ethan's gaze flicked toward her, briefly steady and unreadable. He could have spoken, then could have declared the truth, but he remained silent. His lawyers had already warned him that defending her directly would only deepen suspicion. After the meeting, HR called Maya into a small office. The manager smiled with brittle politeness as she explained the process. "We simply need to understand the nature of your relationship with Mr. Blackwell. If there is nothing to hide, there should be no problem." The words were meant to be reassuring, but to Maya they felt like a blade. As if she were already guilty, as if her worth and her integrity were nothing more than rumors to be validated or dismissed. She left the office with her pride in tatters, her chest burning with humiliation. That evening, as she packed up to leave, Ethan appeared at her desk. His voice was quiet, careful. "I want to handle this. Let me protect you." She met his gaze, her own eyes hard, with unshed tears. "If you defend me, it only makes it worse. People will believe I need you to fight my battles." She lifted her chin. "I will not let them see me that way." Ethan's expression darkened frustration. Flickering, but he said nothing more. Maya walked out of the building into the chill night air, her shoulders squared, though every step felt heavier than the last. At home, she sat in the dark of her apartment, the city noise muted by the glass, and stared at the image of herself on the screen. It was only a photo, a frozen moment that had meant nothing more than kindness. Yet now it had power over her entire career, her reputation, her sense of self. She thought of her mother back in Ohio, proud of her daughter working in New York, and her stomach twisted. How could she explain that the dream she had worked so hard for was crumbling because of something she had never done? Meanwhile, Ethan stood in his office long after the lights had gone out on most floors. The city stretched before him, glittering and indifferent. He hated the helplessness, he felt the inability to shield Maya without risking greater damage. He remembered her words in the elevator, that if she did not prove herself, no one would believe in her. He understood now how deeply that truth shaped her. Yet watching her fight this battle alone tore at him in ways he had not expected. He pressed his hands against the cool glass and admitted to himself that this was no longer just about reputation. It was about her, and the storm had only begun. The days that followed were suffocating for Maya. The scandal did not fade as quickly as she hoped. Instead, more outlets picked it up, repeating the same photo and attaching new commentary about power dynamics and the dangers of inappropriate office relationships. Each article felt like another stone added to the weight crushing her chest. She buried herself in work, arriving before dawn and leaving after midnight, determined to prove through sheer effort that she was indispensable. Yet the whispers did not stop. Even when colleagues praised her efficiency, she caught the doubt in their eyes, the unspoken question of whether her competence mattered if people believed she was only there because of Ethan. Then the blow came from a direction she had not expected. Victoria Hale, with her polished smile and subtle venom, gave an off-the-record remark to a journalist she knew well. The piece appeared 2 days later. Sources suggest that Maya Collins has significant personal debts and may be relying on her relationship with Ethan Blackwell for financial rescue. Maya's hands shook as she read it. It was true that she carried heavy student loans, but she had never hidden that fact, nor had she ever asked for Ethan's help. To see her struggles twisted into evidence of manipulation was unbearable. She wanted to scream to fight back, but she also knew that denial would only fuel the fire. That evening, Ethan summoned her into his office. His expression was taut, his eyes shadowed from too many sleepless nights. He gestured for her to sit, but she remained standing, her arms folded tightly across her chest. "Is it true?" he asked quietly. "Do you have debts you have not disclosed?" The words struck her like a physical blow. She stared at him, disbelief flooding her. "Of course I have debts, Ethan. Most people my age do. But you think I am using you to pay them?" His jaw tightened. "I needed to know the truth, Maya. You needed to know," she repeated, her voice rising with fury and hurt. "I thought you saw me as more than what everyone else says. I thought you knew me better than that." His gaze held hers, unflinching. "I just needed the truth." The silence that followed was louder than any argument. Maya felt the fragile bridge between them shatter. All the small moments of trust, the quiet gestures, the glimpses of humanity, gone swept away by a single question that revealed his doubt. She shook her head, tears burning hot in her eyes. "You are just like them," she whispered. "You see me as someone grasping for what she does not deserve." Ethan opened his mouth as though to protest, but she raised her hand, cutting him off. "Do not. If you cannot see who I am by now, then nothing I say will matter." She turned her heels, striking the polished floor with angry precision. Ethan's voice followed her, heavy with something like regret. "Maya." But she did not stop. She walked out of his office, out of Blackwell Tower, and into the night with her pride in pieces, and her heart aching so fiercely it stole her breath. She did not return the next day or the day after. By the end of the week, she had submitted her resignation through HR. The words clipped and formal, her determination, written into every sentence, effective immediately. Ethan read the email in silence, the ache in his chest sharper than he had expected. He had lost employees before. People came and went in the high-stakes world of business. But losing Maya felt different. It felt like tearing something vital from his life. Still, he did not chase her. His pride and his guilt held him still, convincing him that perhaps it was better this way. Maya, meanwhile, tried to piece together a life outside the company. She sent out resumes, attended interviews, forced smiles across polished tables. But the shadow of the scandal followed her. Employers hesitated, their questions circling delicately around the rumors. She saw the doubt in their eyes, the hesitation in their voices. More than once, she left interviews with tears threatening to fall, telling herself she would not cry until she reached the anonymity of the subway. Nights were worse. In the quiet of her apartment, she replayed Ethan's words again and again. I just needed the truth, the disbelief, the hurt, the betrayal repeated like an echo she could not silence. She told herself she hated him, now that she was better off away from the storm that surrounded his name. Yet even as she whispered those lies to herself, she missed the sound of his voice. When it softened the weight of his jacket across her shoulders, the rare glimmers of vulnerability he had shared. Pride told her to move on. Her heart told her something else entirely. Ethan threw himself into work, into meetings, into strategies, and negotiations that filled every hour of his days. To anyone watching, he was as composed as ever, the billionaire CEO, unshaken by gossip. But behind closed doors, he replayed the moment in his office when Maya's eyes had burned with betrayal. He told himself he had only wanted to protect the company that he had needed to know the full scope of risk. But in the stillness of night, he admitted that it was fear. Fear that she might indeed see him as a solution to her debts. Fear that he was once again being mocked behind closed doors, a rich man played for a fool. That fear had cost him her trust, and trust, he realized too late, was the only thing she had ever wanted from him. They lived parallel lives, then separated by pride, both wounded, both longing in silence. Maya struggling to rebuild. Without the shadow of his name, Ethan haunted by the emptiness of his office, without her steady presence. Neither willing to admit what they had lost, neither willing to risk reaching across the chasm, and so the misunderstanding grew roots deep and stubborn, until it threatened to bury them both. Maya's attempts to find new work quickly turned into a lesson in how reputation could outweigh skill. She had interviews lined up with firms across Manhattan, smaller companies that should have been eager for someone with her experience. But each time she walked through polished glass doors, she felt the weight of the scandal clinging to her like a second skin. Hiring managers smiled politely, yet their questions skirted uncomfortably close to gossip. "We have a very professional culture here," one woman said delicately, as if implying Maya did not. Another asked if she would be comfortable keeping a low profile, as though she were a liability before she had even started. Each rejection email landed like another bruise. She reminded herself she was strong, that she had survived worse, but strength felt brittle when doors kept closing. Bills piled up her student loan notices, glaring from the kitchen counter, and she took on freelance work through agencies just to keep afloat. It was at one such job that fate twisted the knife further. Blackwell Industries was hosting the unveiling of a major infrastructure project, a venture years in the making with hundreds of millions at stake, and cameras from every major network waiting to broadcast the announcement. Maya had been assigned by a marketing agency to help with logistics, a role far beneath what she once managed at Ethan's side, but she accepted it quietly. The morning of the event, she stood among staff in black uniforms directing guests to their seats, her clipboard heavy in her hand. She told herself she could manage, that she could fade into the background. But when the stage lights flared and Ethan Blackwell walked to the podium, her heart betrayed her. He looked exactly as he always had, composed in his dark suit, his gaze steady, his voice calm, as he began to address the packed hall. Yet she noticed the faint tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes scanned the crowd as if searching for something, or someone. Maya tried to stay hidden, but the room was vast and the cameras everywhere. She caught his gaze across the sea of faces, and in that instant she saw the flicker of recognition, the subtle shift in his expression. He had found her. Her pulse hammered. She ducked her head, focusing on her clipboard, but she could not block out his voice, deep and resonant through the speakers. He spoke of progress of partnerships, of the company's future, but beneath the words, she heard strain. She saw the way his gaze returned to where she stood at the side of the room again and again, as though anchoring himself on her presence. The crowd applauded, journalists typed furiously, but Maya's world narrowed to the thundering beat of her heart and the impossible pull of his eyes. She told herself she had left him behind, that pride had demanded distance. But standing there as he addressed the world, she realized with a shock that her feelings had not faded. They had only been buried under anger and hurt. And Ethan, for all his wealth and power, looked in that moment less like an untouchable CEO and more like a man searching desperately for what he had lost. The realization struck her with such force she had to grip the edge of a chair to steady herself. Whatever happened next, she knew the storm between them was not finished. It was only gathering strength. The auditorium was filled with the rustle of papers, the clicking of cameras, and the low hum of anticipation that always surrounded a major announcement. Ethan stood at the podium, notes in front of him, teleprompters ready. Yet his mind was far from the polished speech he had rehearsed. His eyes kept drifting to the side of the room where Maya stood, half hidden among staff. Her posture straight, her face carefully neutral. He felt the words of his presentation blur as something stronger pressed against his chest. For months he had let fear and silence dictate his choices, but in that moment he understood with piercing clarity that if he did not speak now, he might lose her forever. The applause from the latest segment faded, and instead of continuing with the next bullet point, Ethan set his papers aside. The shift was subtle at first, but then his voice changed lower, unguarded, cutting through the vast room. I am supposed to talk to you about numbers, about profits, about the bright future of this company. But today I need to speak about something else. A hush fell instantly, the audience sensing the break in script. Journalists leaned forward, cameras whirred faster, the board members shifted uneasily. Ethan's gaze swept the room, then settled where Maya stood frozen. Yes, there have been rumors. He continued, his voice steady, though his pulse thundered. Rumors about me and my assistant. He paused deliberately, letting the weight of the words sink in. People have speculated, whispered, judged. They want to know the truth. Here it is. The silence was absolute. Ethan drew a breath, his eyes locked on Maya's, and for the first time in his public life, he let vulnerability thread openly through his words. I care about her, not because of power, not because of image, but because she reminds me I am human. She challenges me when everyone else stays silent. She works harder than anyone I have ever met, and she makes me want to be better than the man I was yesterday. His words echoed through the hall, startling even himself with their rawness. And if loving her costs me this company, so be it. Gasps rippled through the audience, followed by a flurry of flashes from cameras. Board members exchanged alarmed glances. Investors whispered sharply, but Ethan did not look away from Maya. She stood rooted in place, shock flooding her features. Tears already glistening in her eyes, despite her effort to contain them. The confession had been public, irreversible, and achingly clear. Ethan let the silence stretch, then added with finality, I will not hide the truth because others prefer lies. The woman you have seen in photographs is not a scandal. She is my choice. The hall erupted with noise, some clapping in awe, others murmuring in outrage, journalists shouting questions. Security shifted nervously. PR staff scrambled, but Ethan remained still. His gaze fixed on the only face that mattered. Maya's breath caught in her throat as the full weight of what he had done sank in. He had risked his reputation, his empire, everything he had built, just to make one truth known. And that truth was her. The clipboard slipped from her trembling hands and clattered softly against the floor. Her pride, her fear, all the walls she had built collapsed under the force of his words. For the first time since leaving him, she let herself believe she was not a burden, not a mistake, but something worth fighting for. Cameras continued to flash. The crowd buzzed with chaos, but for Maya, the world had narrowed to a single man at a podium declaring his heart with reckless courage. And she could no longer pretend she did not feel the same. The chaos after Ethan's confession was unlike anything Maya had ever witnessed. Reporters swarmed the stage, shouting questions. Board members whispered urgently to one another, and PR staff scrambled to control the narrative. Yet through it all, Ethan remained steady, his gaze never leaving hers, until the event ended and security ushered him away from the storm of cameras. Maya stood frozen in the wings, her heart hammering. She wanted to run, to hide from the tidal wave of attention his words had unleashed. But she also felt an ache pulling her toward him. Hours later, after the building had emptied and the media frenzy had spilled onto every major news outlet, Ethan found her. She was standing alone in the quiet lobby, clutching her coat like a shield. He approached slowly, his expression softer than she had ever seen it. "I failed to protect you," he said quietly, his voice rough. "But I will not fail to fight for us." She looked at him, her throat tight. "Ethan, you do not understand. People will talk. They already are. My career, my name, everything is ruined." He shook his head firmly. "Let them talk. Love is the only truth I will stand by." The word love hung between them, fragile and immense. Maya's eyes filled with tears. "You make it sound so simple. It is not simple. It is terrifying." He stepped closer, close enough that she could see the raw sincerity in his eyes. "I know it is terrifying, but nothing worthwhile comes without risk. I am willing to risk everything." The dam of her pride broke then, and with it came a flood of emotion she had fought for months. "I was so afraid," she admitted, her voice shaking. "Afraid you would see me as weak as someone to pity, as someone not worth standing beside." Ethan reached for her hand, his touch gentle but sure. "You were never weak, Maya. You were stronger than anyone else in that building, stronger than me. You carried yourself through storms that would have broken others, and you are worth everything." The tears spilled freely now, and for the first time, she let them fall without shame. He pulled her into his arms, holding her as though she were the only thing anchoring him. The noise of the city outside faded, leaving only the sound of her heartbeat pressed against his chest. On the sidewalk outside, passers-by recognized them phones, lifted to capture the moment, but Maya no longer cared. Pride no longer mattered. She kissed him then, a kiss that was both an admission and a promise, her hands trembling as she let herself finally surrender. The flash of cameras surrounded them, but they held onto each other as though the world no longer existed. In the weeks that followed, the company weathered the storm. Some investors threatened to withdraw. Others stood firm, and the media spun endless narratives about the billionaire who had risked everything for love. Through it all, Ethan remained calm. His public statements measured his private devotion unwavering. He offered to step down as CEO if it would shield Maya, but she refused. "I will not let them say, 'You gave up your throne because of me. We face this together.'" Gradually, the frenzy died down, replaced by new scandals and fresher headlines. The story of Ethan and Maya remained, but now it was painted less as a scandal and more as a rare glimpse of humanity in the ruthless world of business. Maya returned to Blackwell Tower, not as an assistant, but as a newly appointed manager in the strategy department. Ethan had insisted she deserved a role that reflected her ability, And though she hesitated, worried about perceptions she accepted because she knew she had earned it. Walking back into the building was daunting, but she held her head high. Some colleagues still whispered, but many offered genuine smiles. Slowly, respect returned, forged now none, not just from her competence, but from the undeniable truth that she had endured fire and emerged stronger. Months passed, and life began to settle into a rhythm neither of them had thought possible. Ethan still worked long hours, but he also learned to pause to take evenings with Maya to let himself rest. Maya still pushed herself, but she also learned to lean, to accept help without shame. Their love did not erase their scars, but it gave them a place to heal together. One evening they walked hand in hand through Central Park, the city lights glowing behind them, the air cool with the promise of spring. Maya glanced at him, her voice soft. "Do you ever regret it? Standing up there saying all of that in front of the world?" He smiled faintly, his thumb brushing across her knuckles. "Not for a second." She laughed quietly, shaking her head. "You are impossible, and you are worth it," he replied simply. She stopped walking, then pulling him to a halt. Her eyes searched his, the fear that had haunted her for so long, finally dissolving. "I am not running anymore," she whispered. Ethan's smile deepened relief and love mingling in his gaze. "Good, because neither am I." They kissed under the city sky, the hum of traffic, and the distant sound of music from a street performer surrounding them like a blessing. For the first time, Maya felt not the weight of pride or the sting of vulnerability, but the steady strength of love, freely chosen. And that she realized was the beginning of everything.